Good evening, everybody. Lala and I are here with Mark Certo, who is talking on triad mind and some other history we might be interested in. We're very glad to have you here. Mark is quite has quite an interesting history. I'm going to let him go through most of it, but I'm going to give you some highlights. Bob Monroe had some weird experiences, out of body, etc., and decided he would do a deep dive on it. And he engaged Mark Serto to be a sound engineer, audio engineer, overall engineer, and to work with him. And they came up with the Gateway Method. Mark has been there since nearly the beginning. If not, maybe he wasn't there in his first dream, but he was in there after Monroe Institute got going. And he has a lot to say. Since then, he has segued into doing his own thing after Monroe Institute and is now doing Triad Mind, which has many facets. Many of them are interesting. He's doing his own personal method for bringing all these kinds of consciousness and unusual consciousness states and consciousness experience to all of us. Lala and I welcome you, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for coming here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
And as
so
far as
give
my,
us some of your history and tell us what you want to tell us about all of that, and then bring us up to date.
sure. Well, my history with meditation and altered states goes back quite a ways, all the way back to the mid 1970s when I got involved in meditation. But I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia from New York City. And after spending about a year or two there, I started a recording studio. And then one day, a guy named Bob Monroe called my answering machine, and he and I met. This was in the spring of 1988. We got along quite famously. We had a lot of similar backgrounds, and even though I wasn't having out of body experiences at the time, I loved what he was doing over at the Institute, using sound as a means of accessing altered states. As a musician, I understood that there was, quite an effect that sound, and especially contiguous sound, could have on states of consciousness. But Bob's particular process, which he called hemisync, fascinated me, and I spent 13 years from that period on. First 7 working with Bob, and then the last 6 working as pretty much the driving force for a lot of the creative things that were being done, and the improvements of hemisync over the course of those years was pretty vast. Then that was due to reverse engineering EEG readings of people in unique states of consciousness, whether they be like the out of body experience or any number of particular states, and reverse engineering those readings and pathway to sound recordings, which could then inform the listeners as to how to perform that function themselves. So it was very fulfilling. I left there in 2001. I didn't create the gateway, I did reproduce it. The original version that is so well noted in that document now that's floating around the internet was quite an extended version of the one that's currently being used at the Institute now. And they, in addition, Bob had created other programs that I had reproduced or produced further while he was, getting up there in years, and his skills weren't really there, and he trusted my judgment. So I took that and went with it, and it was quite a fulfilling and productive time, and still in use today. So there's a legacy there, and I'm happy to be a part of it. As far as
I,
the
well,
triad bond is concerned, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was just going to say one of the neatest things of all to me is now that the CIA document is declassified, people who went, oh, what is this woo woo stuff? Got to see in black and white in an official government document how seriously the government was taken. And then I spent decades in the intelligence community. I spent quite a bit of time at Fort Meade and NSA.
Thank you.
And so I saw DIA, NSA, Fort Meade people actually going to a specific place
Mhm.
and doing gateway to do remote viewing
Hmm.
and other things. And it just was very, very interesting. And I'm really happy to have you here because of how interesting all that stuff is. And just for the audience, so you know, I left extensive stuff in the show notes on YouTube that Mark provided, and some I'm going to add later that including a link to the CIA paper, just in case you're interested. But of course, Mark has done a lot of stuff since then. So I interrupted him. Let him continue.
Well, we can just let the conversation flow as you want. I don't care whatever questions you want to ask. I was just going to add that the triad mind, which I began after leaving in 2001, the Institute, was approximately 2003, 2004. I spent a lot of time doing additional research and basically integrating different techniques that I had learned at the Institute into a program of self realization and self actualization. So, the idea there is to understand basically who you are as an energy system, consciousness, and to learn to apply that to good things in your life, which is essentially where Bob wanted to take the Institute eventually as well, but they ended up taking a slightly different path, even though I think all paths end up in the same place anyway.
Well, especially since they have the same underlying principles. Whatever the mechanism is, it's the
Hmm.
underlying mechanism for all of it. You can address it in any way you want that works.
Hmm.
And I understand that what Bob did with your help and what you're doing now with your own a group and people you work with is kind of reinforcement learning in that you do a thing, you see how it works, and you tune it. And
That's right.
so this is absolutely how all really high speed, low cost, the only right piece is the best piece is the piece you don't have to use, can throw it away and try something else. That kind of construction has been made like worldwide famous with Elon Musk doing SpaceX and other things. So it just kind of makes sense. It was clear from reading all of Bob's books and reading the CIA papers and so forth that that's what people were doing. They were doing cut and try, and optimize.
Absolutely.
Okay,
And
so
that's
tell me the
that's the
kind.
mystery of consciousness that
Yeah, tell me the
unfolding.
kinds of things you're doing with the try and mind.
Well, we focus on three specific, shall I call them, territories of consciousness. Bob's model of consciousness was mapped out in altered states that he called focus levels. And the reason he came up with these focus levels is because it was a simple counting method. In back in the early days of consciousness research and psi research, they created a process called autogenic relaxation techniques, where you basically count down, from 10 down to 1 or 1 to 10. And that was with each counting number, with each passing number, you would relax a body part and give yourself an affirmation that life is wonderful and you can relax into this process. Well, Bob took that a little bit further and started doing the higher counting method that was as he would shift the binaural beat complexes to accommodate various states of consciousness that were springboarded off of the hypnagogic state, which is that pathway in between wakefulness and sleep. And most people experience it very mildly. Their linear thought process will kind of go into an diffuse dream-like imagery, and then the next thing they know, it's lights out, nobody home, right? That's the way we usually go to sleep, but experienced meditators and people who are being influenced by stimulus in order to entrain those brain waves to be able to give one that experience of the hypnagogic state will be able to ride it. But as you move through it, you can't just stay in one particular pattern because you will fall asleep. So Bob would increase the intensity of higher wave function in order to keep people awake, and that resulted in what I'll label as transcendent experiences. So that's a long intro to talk about the containers or these territories of consciousness. I've narrowed it down to three specific, which are the conscious, subconscious, and superconscious stratum. Each one of these has a different way of processing information. The content that we experience in those various states, whether that be unconscious processes, superconscious processes, or conscious processes, where you're actually thinking and using authority and agency versus being reactive of things that are triggering some subconscious memory versus using your intuition in order to connect with people on a deeper level, which would be more of a super conscious process. Soul psi functioning, I believe, is a super conscious, not a subconscious process, even though people like Jung would call it the collective unconscious because you're not really conscious of it. So we're throwing around a word like conscious and consciousness an awful lot. And the truth of the matter is nobody really knows what the heck we're talking about here, which is really amazing to me.
Well,
I spent
it's amazing because give the people cut and tried, pasted, figured out, exchanged ideas, and came to these conclusions. So do me a favor, define super consciousness in whatever way you want to.
I would say in essence, it is a construct that is in part a construct that is part of the human's longing to know that we do survive physical death, that there is something that is larger than us, and we wish to connect with that. That's one definition. Another definition could also be the longing for unity with another human being through love, right? I don't know if you guys have ever been in love, but if you are in love, you get lost in that other person. It's what Jung.
We know?
Maybe. Yeah.
Are you thinking
I,
about it at this point?
it's like a drug. The love. It's
Well,
overwhelming.
it is
It
very
can
much
be,
like
yeah.
a drug. And it is a quest and a desire to connect with another being that is, in essence, an object. You're a
Okay.
subject, that's an object. And it's the object of your desire, of course, but this union that you're looking for has a much deeper principle that is relating to this superconscious construct that we create. On another level, the superconscious exists whether we care, whether we have a construct about it or not. Consciousness is fundamental is
Mm-hmm.
what we're coming to understand. The
Mm-hmm.
archetypes that are packets of containers, of concepts, which or I'll call them energies rather than concepts, because they exist prior to our conceptualizing them. Okay. We don't create them, they exist. We don't create consciousness, it exists. That's why I call it super meaning overarching. And it does have an intelligence all its own. The Earth life system itself is a super conscious construct.
Right.
We tend to think of ourselves as, just going about our lives. We are inhabitants inside a living, breathing
Right.
planet where it's like we're like in a womb. It has its own intelligence. We call it evolution. We try to break it down, but it does have its own season. It does have its own time. We're just kind of along for the ride, and
So
rightly so, right?
would other people equate, whether it's right or not, super consciousness with higher self?
One could, sure. If you
Okay,
think
but it
about
seems to me that your definition of super conscious is a major categorization, an organizational principle that's a subset of higher consciousness because outside of our consciousness, higher self seems to be everything, just
well,
everything it
what's
can be.
true, except to say that if we keep that mindset, right? I mean, that's the initial mindset, and that prompts the exploration into these great mysteries. That's a beautiful thing. It could also be a beautiful thing that we just long to connect, right? At a subconscious level, we want to be connected. All of those things may be called ego function, but they serve a purpose, and that purpose is to motivate us to move forward, to reach a higher state of evolution. We'll call it that.
Mhm.
That said, this overarching construct, this higher self concept can be integrated. If you don't integrate it, it will always be out there. Are
Mm-hmm.
you following where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't accept the responsibility for not only looking for this higher self, but actualizing it, self realization is the realization that you are a multidimensional being, and actualizing it, putting it to use. If you don't do that, what's the point? At least for me, I have to ask, are you going to just say, oh, great, I've reached enlightenment? Now I'm just going to sit here and not
Ta-da!
care about anything. You can choose that path, but it's not exactly the most efficient use of a gift that you're given and that you actually put time into.
Okay, in your practice, how do you, I guess it depends on what people want from you, but let's suppose in general, what are the kinds of things that would cause you to interact with one of your pupils or students or trainees that are, you would say you want to do this to interact with the superconscious? So is that, so I'm assuming that, I mean, look, I'm asking you a leading question because when the two of us got together a few years ago, she would go into her superconscious state, interact with her guardians, interact with people she was reading, interact doing her remote viewing, all of that stuff. And of course, my ego, being a curious scientist, I would yappity yap yap and break her connection. Oh my goodness. About the third time I got slapped around, I didn't do it anymore.
I understand, Bob. Sometimes we're slow learners, right?
I'm really, really slow about learning this.
So, what was your question in there,
Oh, I'm
Bob?
sorry. Yeah, yeah. So what do you, what name, give us an example of how you help a student or a learner integrate the concept of super consciousness into their practice.
Through direct experience first and through listening to them intently.
Mhm.
A lot of people will describe the experiences or the longings that they have in the work that I do and in the programs that I give. And it's not exclusive to this work. I hear it, I've heard it all through my professional career. They will have these unique experiences or try to express a longing, and they will flub it. They'll spend time trying to articulate it, but they can't.
Right.
It's hard.
Mhm.
And they will end that sentence with, if that makes any sense. I have to listen to people.
Yeah.
That's how I help.
Oh, yeah.
Presence is the short answer for that. Now, I'm not just being present with their physical presence. I'm not
Mhm.
just being present with their voice, even though those two inform me. I'm being present with myself while I'm in relationship to them.
Mhm.
My empathy and my understanding of these things that we're discussing here, of these longings, of these desires to experience, I've had them. I have them. I understand this. I too am human. I can be present with somebody in that state of longing, of experience, of desire, and through intuition, for lack of a better word, my connection with the superconscious, connect with them and get what it is they're telling me. Not because I'm long in the tooth in this business and I've heard it all, even though that too is true, but because I'm connecting with an actual human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel what they're feeling because they're being vulnerable with me in their longings. And I understand that. And I know what to say. The more I get to know the human that I'm talking with, the person, I don't want to say human, makes me sound like I'm an alien and
he
dealing with them.
claims I'm an alien all the time.
Well, I'm pretty sure I'm not exactly from here, but that's another story. The more I connect with people on that level, the better I am able to help them. The work itself, the recordings I make, take them through the experiences, and they're well designed for the purpose of continuing to strive and push the envelope and the threshold that they were met at from the last exercise. But it's gentle. I don't believe in, blowing the psyche all to hell,
Right.
which a
Right.
lot of people will do with, like ayahuasca journeys. I'm not, trying to be cast derogatory dispersions everywhere, but if the psyche is not prepared for such a journey, it can fragment.
Oh yeah.
And if it is integrated enough, and the it being the ego sense of self, right? Which is looking for a transcendent experience. So I pop a tab of acid, I eat a bunch of mushrooms. The next thing I know, I'm engaged with the cosmos. And it may be a great experience, but I can't make sense of it. I can't integrate it. All I can say is I want another experience like that. And that's state chasing. That's
Right.
not application. That's not realization. That's not actualization. The things that are written about in that document, the CIA document, are a form, an attempt of actualizing consciousness, especially leaning on altered states. And all of that was predicated on a book written by Itzhak Bentov called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. And the early psi research. There's something there. We know it is that consciousness and energy are related. We just don't know how. And the best we can do, as you said earlier, Bob, is basically try, fall down, get back up again.
Right.
That's the stone truth of all of this stuff.
So,
You know,
so on average, how long do you take? Let's call it. I'm going to use a term, but I mean it very generically. How long do you find that on average it takes a person's neuroplasticity to reorganize their brains or and consciousness into taking on these new concepts? Do you see an kind of average?
yeah, the Triad Mind program takes us 6 months. I offer that. 6 months is integration period. The
Got
slower you take this process, the better off you are and the better chance you have of not only succeeding in the various states that you're trying to achieve, but also making sense out of the data. Because
right.
that's all these experiences are. It's all any experience is data, right? The conscious mind processes this data in certain ways. It bounces up against the subconscious processes, which aren't conscious. We're not conscious of them
Right.
or reactive. It's all predicated on memory or energetics. It could even be pre-verbal stuff, you know, things that happen in your early childhood development that have nothing to do with logical conscious processes that you're reacting to. It's not really, here, you're not really an infant anymore, right? You can rationalize it all you like, but it's still going to be present. The more presence you bring to that, the more nullified the energetic response becomes. Same with superconscious processes. The more you contact what some people refer to as a higher self, as if it's out there somewhere, like a guardian angel, all of those things are very real, and that concept or construct keeps us separated from it. That subject object split. If my higher self is out there and I'm always trying to contact it, I will never integrate it. It will never become a part of me. So to answer to your question, Bob, 6 months,
Got
and
it.
sometimes it takes longer than that. Sometimes people go through the stage one of the program, which has been out for I don't know 10 to 12 years now. They'll do it over and over and over again, which is available to them because it's inexpensive. And they learn something new each and every time.
Mhm.
And they write me all the time and tell me, it's amazing how different this program feels. It's not the program. Program was same as it ever was. You've changed.
Yeah,
You've
I'm
changed.
thinking. I'm thinking as you get into it and you practice it, you interact with the instructor, teacher, or guide, and then you learn a few things and you have some success.
Mhm.
You are learning how to filter out all the junk you got off your phone the hour before you started, or off the TV or
Right.
whatever, newspaper, and all the other crap in your life. But as you go longer, you learn to jump into the filtering state quicker. And people usually call this listening not to the right part of the brain rather than the wrong part of the brain. And whatever it means, it's you learn how to do a filtering. And that just gotta come with practice.
Well, I think you're peeling back layers of yourself that we're taught to put on,
Yes.
or, whatever experiences we have to peel them back to get closer to what we're trying to achieve.
Gotta get our ego out of the way.
Well, I was listening to him earlier, and you said that some people think we have to get rid of our ego, but it's necessary to keep that balance.
Well, I would say it's not necessary, but it can get in the way.
Yeah.
Oh
You
yeah,
gotta
it
learn.
gets
You
in the
gotta learn to
way.
mind it.
It gets in the way, but it's not the bad guy. It's not the protagonist in the story of consciousness. In many ways, in my opinion, it can actually be I'm sorry, it's not the antagonist in the story of consciousness. It's the protagonist. I want to understand what the nature of self is. Ego is nothing but a self created construct, partially self created, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you make your own ego to a point. Others are informed. Other bits of it are informed. You shall do this, you shall not do that. This is the appropriate way to act. This is not the appropriate way to act. All of those constructs, these are your limitations, these you're allowed to do. All of those are constructs, right? Some are self inflicted, some are inflicted by the limitations of others through whatever the reason is, jealousy, stupidity, ignorance, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Ultimately, that is what you want to question. That is what you want to relax. The
Right.
ego wants to know that it survives physical death. It also doesn't like limitation. Mostly. Some people like, little boxes because it feels safe.
Right.
But eventually, there's an intelligence in our evolution, behind our evolution, that is going
Mhm.
to push us out of those comfort zones, of those boxes. There's also an intelligence behind that evolution that's going to say, hey, buddy, slow down a little bit.
Mhm.
There is no light at the end of the tunnel, per se. It's you.
Right.
Find yourself. That's what exploring consciousness is all about on the self realization level. Once you realize how incredible you are, how
Mhm.
multidimensional consciousness truly is, and you are consciousness, ergo, you are multidimensional,
Right.
the question then becomes, I used to say this to Bob all the time. He said, uh, he'd put out the proposition, I am more than my physical body, right? That's part of his gateway affirmation. That's the first line in it. Well, yeah, okay. Now that I know that I'm more than my physical body, now what? A lot of people don't even bother to read or speak the rest or consider the rest of the affirmation, which is, therefore, I deeply desire to know, expand, to experience, to
Right.
understand, to direct, to control, and use these energies and energy systems which may be beneficial to me and those who follow me. What are these energy systems? Consciousness.
Yep.
Yep.
Explore and apply. It's like it's like electric light. It's
Yep.
one thing to discover electricity, it's another thing to learn how to generate it, it's another thing to learn how to use it, right?
Right.
And there are tolerance thresholds within electrical systems. We call them circuit breakers, fuses, right? Too much energy goes through a fuse or a circuit breaker. What happens? Trips off.
Mhm.
That's why you don't want to do ayahuasca
Right.
to access this energy. You're going to blow a circuit or get involved in state chasing. So that's my little speech about don't do drugs, meditate.
So
And
do you
this comes
find?
from a person who's not, I'm an experimenter. So,
Yeah, but do you find it makes people dissociate?
oh, yeah,
I
absolutely.
believe because it is traumatic at times.
Yes. And meditation can be a form of
Oh, it can. It can
disassociation.
indeed.
Right. So the point being is, what are you there for? What are you looking for? I have some great mentors in my life. All my work stands on the shoulders of giants. It's not just Bob Monroe. It's Edgar Mitchell. It's Dr. Charles Tart, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. These are the people I came up with, right?
Mhm.
They're all gone now, unfortunately, except for Charlie. He's still with us, but I don't think he does workshops anymore. They were incredible mentors. They would tell me, don't confuse the map, which was Bob's focus levels, with the territories. Edgar Mitchell. There's so much more to the story than focus levels. It's just a roadway. It's like, you thinking that 95 is the only interstate in the United States. No, there's a lot of back alleys and trails and other interstates that go east to west. It's a big territory.
Analogy, I like that.
Yeah, me too. Because she loves to go the back roads, and we see stuff we would never see if we just stayed on the interstate.
Exactly. Exactly.
I have a question really quick. Well, he wants. I have a question I ask everybody. What's like the most craziest or extreme experience you've ever had in your whole life? But also, I wanted to know something. Um, when you start to do this process with yourself, are are there beings or entities that you know try to sidetrack you sometimes? Does that ever happen?
Ooh, good question.
Hmm. Well, there were two questions there, weren't there? So the strangest experience I've ever had is still ongoing. I breathe in, I breathe out, and every moment's just an experience.
Mhm.
Some experiences are for my learning, some are for my pleasure, some for my displeasure. I interpret experience in any way that I want to. I'm sovereign in that way. Nobody gets to interpret my experience for me, right? So, with regards to hoobies, that's what I call them. Astral beings that are out there waiting to prance upon you and stuff like that, inhibit your growth pattern.
Mhm.
I see those as symbolic projections of the subconscious mind.
Okay.
I see those. I've run into them in my early time or in my early days of meditation, of sleep paralysis, wake up in the middle of the night and there's something in the room and I can't move and my fear response kicks in until I realize my conscious mind actually kicks in and goes, now this is sleep paralysis, buddy. You've done this before. It's like, oh yeah. All of a sudden the hoobie in the room leaves.
Mhm.
Some people can pick up on entities that are of departed spirits, right?
Right.
Humans. I can walk into a room and tell you something's off,
Mhm.
right? Does that frighten me? No. So if these things exist, and they don't frighten me. Why? Because the symbolic representations that I have dealt with in my years of meditation practice, where I've looked at these things objectively and say, oh, you represent this fear. It's curious. Why would I be afraid of that? Oh, I remember when I was a kid, I used to be afraid of that idea because that idea was fed to me from the horror movies I used to watch on late Friday night, chiller theater. Oh, that's right. And those scary stories I was told in Catholic catechism, where they said if you don't do this right or don't do that right, you're going to end up in hell. Or, that movie I saw called The Exorcist, where, somebody was intruded upon. All those things are bits of information that enter into the psyche and promote fear. And it's very existential.
Mhm.
Same thing applies to political fears. I see people scared witless about things I'm not afraid of. I don't care if it's ultra right nationalism or liberal left globalism. I'm not afraid.
Right.
I will serpentine. I will use my consciousness and my growth and my abilities to get beyond all of these things that so many people are afraid of. I understand fear. I'm not saying get over it, people.
Mm.
I'm saying explore them. Find out what their root cause is. The stage 2 of Triad Mind, we are working mostly with subconscious content.
Uh-huh.
And the reason that we're working with subconscious content is, to your point before, Bob, the ego's fears, the ego's distortion is what creates problems with our ability to unify, not only with other people, but with aspects of ourselves. All
Mhm.
right. And be able to hold these things in a way that allows sovereignty.
I was going to
Rather,
say people have to learn how to gain agency in their experiences.
and we have it. We have a frame of reference. I
Mhm.
go to make a cup of coffee in the morning. That's agency. All right.
Mhm.
Agency doesn't have to be total control of your life. You can look at these things in a broken down, systematic means that will allow you to create a stair step up to this. I want to call it an ascended level, but that's gets a little too woo woo and magical. It is an ascension. It is a growth process, however. So it's a fair way to speak of that. Although, to what I was saying before about Charlie Tart, I once asked him, you've been at this because Charlie was 60 when I worked with him. He's like 80 now, 85 or something. And I said, you've been at this for 40 years. And I'm 28, 29 years old. Charlie's an older and wiser guy, right? And I had to know, I mean, for all of this effort that you put into this, what's enlightenment?
Mhm.
What am I looking for here? He said, he looked at me square in the eye. He said, I have no idea.
Ah!
All I can tell you is that I am not so darkened anymore. That was enough.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was enough for me. Oh, and I didn't feel particularly darkened prior to. So I was making a point about stage 2 unity of the triad mind. We're using lucid dreaming as a means of interacting with the pure stratum, or the stratum of the subconscious that I call the pure land of the subconscious.
Mhm.
If you've ever had a dream and you weren't lucid, you know that it's no different from a physical reality
Right.
experience, right? You're involved, you're completely engaged. You may not even be you, but
Right.
there is a subject and there is an object or many objects, and it's as real as physical life existence. When you become lucid in that dream state, you now become sovereign.
And
You
you
are
have agency. You can manipulate it.
right.
Mhm.
You don't want it. From my perspective, you don't really want to manipulate it because that entices fantasy,
Uh-huh.
right? Rather, this the technique I'm teaching is to
Got it.
engage, but
Got
you're
it.
doing it consciously. In my dream, I run into Lala and Science Bob, and they're there. I'm really curious, guys. What are we doing here? I
Oh,
could not express that authority or agency or curiosity without lucidity, without my conscious mind participation.
Right.
It's a hybrid state of consciousness. And I've been an avid lucid dreamer for most of my life, I had a profound lucid dream. This goes to your question earlier, Lala, where I would have repetitive dreams throughout various times in my life where they were stresses in my life that I was unresolved with.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a similar thread. And this repetitive dream, and I won't go into the whole of the dream because it'll take up too much time, would go over and over and over again. And one time I became lucid in it. I became aware that I was dreaming. And instead of dealing with these demons in the way that I would prior, which is to obliterate them, I started asking them questions. It was
Hmm.
amazing what I learned.
Oh my God, can you tell us just a little bit? This is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
All right. You want to hear the whole dream now, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Look,
So the
look, she has dreams where things come in and she bolts.
But lately, one time recently, it changed a little bit. So I want to hear.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So in this dream, the common thread is always I'm in the basement of a house, which I
Dude,
perceive to be mine. Very common dream, right?
dude.
Again, we're talking about a symbology that is not only personal, it's almost ubiquitous. It's
Mm,
part of the collective experience. What
mm,
does the house represent? I'll let you figure that one out on your own. It's not hard to figure out. Okay.
mm,
But I'm in the basement of my house. All right. And it's in a state of disrepair. And I need to go into a antechamber room, which is off to the side. And I loathe going into that room.
mm.
Everything that's in that room scares the bejesus out of me. All
Mm-hmm.
right. But fortunately, I have a shotgun propped up right next to the door. So every time I go into this room, I pick up the shotgun, cock it, kick open the door, and when the things start coming, I blast them, and boom, I'm awake.
Right.
Okay? That went on for years at various times of stresses. One
Mm,
time, I went lucid. The dream began where the basement of the house that I was in, which was mine, was actually pretty well renovated. I'm a little bit older now. I'm in my mid 30s. This is a dream I had since like my late teens.
mm,
I go to the door and I hear my own voice saying to me as I go to reach to pick up the shotgun, "You're not going to need that anymore." And I believed it and I went lucid. I was aware because all of a sudden I heard myself speaking to myself in the dream. All right.
mm,
That was my trigger. So I opened up the door and the things were there and they started coming at me. And one had a great big blade, hideous looking things, right? It's a dream.
mm.
And I heard myself say to these things in my dream, in my voice, "You can't hurt me." And I offered my wrists. And you know what? They cut it. Now I'm watching blood gushing out of my wrist. And part of me is thinking, uh-oh. But I realize it's just a dream and I am in control. So I wiped the blood and I showed them. I said, "See, you can't hurt me." And
Mm.
they looked a little confused now, right? I asked it, and don't ask me where this wisdom came from, my higher self. I said, "Before I discreate you, is there anything that you've been trying to tell me all this time?" And it just went poof.
Oh.
Oh wow.
It just went poof. And now I'm
They
thinking,
did, they were just they've just been effing with you.
pretty much, right? So the dream continued, and I'm walking up a stairway where I reach the top, and other things are coming to me, hideous things, and I just stopped them. It's like, enough of the charade here. Is there anything you've been trying to tell me?" Poof. I get to the very top, and there is a landing, like a narrow hallway at the top of the stair, and there's a door to my left, and there's a huge black hole in the wall, maybe about 6 feet in diameter, jagged edges, boarded over. Okay.
Mhm.
And I know what I've been looking for all this time lives in that hole.
Oh
So I
God.
begin to pull the boards off, right? As I'm struggling to do that, the door to my left swings open with huge force. And
Mhm.
this hideous thing, I mean, it's like all the hideous things that I've dealt with in the room thus far and through all the years, they didn't compare to this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that like, wow. Mind you, I'm still lucid, right? And it says to me, congratulations. Now, before you go in there and get what you know, what you need, we have to talk.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is great, right? And I go into its room and we're about to sit down and have a nice long chat about whatever it is that my subconscious has been yearning to understand, this complex that's unresolved with fear because I did not have a traumatic childhood.
Mhm.
It was just an existential angst, okay,
Mhm.
of not knowing. Before I could get the information, my ex wife tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Honey, we need to get up
Oh my
because we're at an
God.
appointment."
Oh
So what
no.
it what it told me, I never had to dream again, Lala. Never had to dream again. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You don't have to consciously integrate in or understand in order to integrate. You have to have the experience. And it doesn't have to be the exact same experience. It can be a like kind experience. The thing that changes is you,
Okay.
your authority, and your agency. So those whobies, right? The scary things that pop up during sleep paralysis,
Mhm.
that's all you, babe.
Okay.
That higher self that you've been chasing after, I hate to tell you, that's all you too. Not the you that you understand yourself to be, the limited sense of self, this ego that Bob and I were talking about earlier. It is a sense of you that is multidimensional. It literally resides in a universe all its own. Very different than conscious mind understanding.
Oh.
So those are my theories, and that's my experience. And believe me when I tell you that experience is just every experience that I've had is a compound of that understanding. So there is no weird experience for me anymore.
Mhm.
There's no penultimate strange experience. But every now and then I do go, wow, thank you.
Right.
If you know what I mean, It's like I don't know what drew that experience to me, but I'm really grateful to have it. So thank you.
Right. Right. I needed to hear that. I'm sure a lot of people needed to hear that, honestly.
It's a long story. I'm sorry if I
No,
bored you.
no, no. It was
We loved it.
it's needed.
Yeah.
Okay.
That your experience and how you dealt with it after struggling with it for a while is informative to people. They need to understand
Mhm.
that something inside of them is trying to remind them or tell them something, and it's best to figure it out.
Well, people have these types of experience and it scares them terribly. I mean, I'm on the socials with a lot of people who get involved in the desire to want to have an out of body experience or what they refer to as astral projection, which I think is a very different experience for reasons I won't get into. But they want to know where these whobies are coming from. They want
Right.
to know if there is a danger in that. Yeah, there is a danger in it. But that danger is you.
Mhm.
If you're really afraid of yourself, I'd suggest you stay away. But if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, you don't scare me, then have at it. You will grow in ways that you can't even imagine because it's beyond the scope of imagination. It's an evolutionary process that is well guided by, I want to say you, but I think there's more to the story than that. a you or a me that I don't fully understand, that is in complete unity with all of the cosmos. And that sounds so large and so new agey that I'm aware of what I'm saying, but I don't want it to sound too woo woo.
No, you're
No,
cool.
no, no. We love the woo
You're
woo.
very
Don't,
normal because
yeah, don't worry about it. We love the woo woo.
I like
All
that
right, well,
you
we'll get
say
woo
you're
woo.
not sure because a lot of people are. This is definite. This is the truth, but we don't. We have feelings, we have experiences, but we don't know. So I appreciate you saying this is my opinion, but I'm not 100%.
I have a hard time listening to people, especially in these areas, that say, "I have the answer and this is it."
For $5.99.
Because and for $1.99 a month, I'll figure to help you figure it out, and I go, "Yeah, f you."
I can appreciate where they're coming from. There are a lot of people who have unusual experiences that are so profound, so life changing that they feel like they are on a mission from God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like Saul of Tarsus walking on the road of from Damascus or to Damascus, and he, has whatever that experience was, and sees Jesus, and Jesus says a small phrase to him, and the next thing he knows, he changes his entire life.
After
It's
being blind for a while.
right. It's not an unusual thing, right? That is so transformative. We hear about it in, people who are in prison, who live life one way, and then they find a sense of spirituality and they become completely devoted to it, and it's life changing.
Right.
I don't I don't really slap these all-knowing teachers. I just wish them luck with
Yeah.
their complete and total gnosis,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like Charlie Tart, this is the tradition I come from. I don't know what enlightenment is.
Mhm.
I only know that I'm not as darkened anymore. I know that
Right.
I am more than my physical body. I'm still wondering, now what?
Mhm.
Just let me make it clear. My saying "f you" is an internal conversation.
No, I get it.
I
No, I
just
get
I
it.
just don't return to them because I know they're not going to be able to interact with me.
I
Because I'm a
understand.
curious person and I'm on a journey. Everywhere I go, I'm constantly curious and on a journey. And I don't want somebody to tell me this is the way it is. You have to do it my way. I want them to tell me this is what I think and this is what I know. Now you go figure out how to integrate that into what you're thinking.
Mhm.
That's right. And when you get some answers, please share.
Mm.
I'm not above being a student, believe me. I learn every single day.
Well, you said something important, which I want to emphasize. In my young, I had a teaching piece of my career was teaching. Then I went off and did really wild stuff for Uncle Sam and others for decades. And then at the end of that, I decided, okay, I had enough of this. I want to do some other things. And I went to a university. And the first thing I noticed is these young people, they were looking for guidance and help, but I realized that the primary way of helping them was to listen to them like nobody else had.
Hmm.
And don't get in their mess. Just say, look, this is what we're here for. We're
Hmm.
going to work on this. If you having a real problem, let's talk about it. But I'm no counselor. You
Yeah.
know, in other words, I would play the pseudo father figure and then treat them like adults and interact with them one on one. I had 55 graduate students in 10 years. So you get better at it if you practice a lot.
Amen. And it's really just about engaging, right? And relating. That's really all it is. I have I'm uncomfortable with the notion of being a teacher. I don't
Yes.
really teach anything.
Right.
I have a lot of experience, but I'm not going to teach you anything. I'm not a facilitator either. That's really kind of a I don't know, different a multi-syllabic word
Yes,
that
exactly.
says basically teaching.
Exactly.
I
Yes.
am proudly a tour guide.
There you go.
I like that.
I am proudly a tour guide. I
That's
have
a
been
that's a
on
great
this
thing.
tour 100 billion times. I know quite a lot about the tour. I can point out places of interest. I can give you historical references. I can tell you what my first experience of taking the tour was. But I can't create the tour for you. That is left up to this aspect of the self that we're referring to as the higher self. That part of us that is only and solely concerned with our spiritual evolution. And I'm not even going to define what that means, but
Mhm.
we all know what it means for us.
Right. That's what I was going to ask. I always wondered how many times have we come here? Do we have to come here? But are you saying that since we're all connected and we're everything at once, we never really leave? We're just a part of us is here? Does that make sense? So I feel like my whole being is here, but my whole being isn't here. It's just a small piece.
Yes. Thank goodness. I'm glad we're not all here. I'm glad that there's something besides the crap we have to live in every day that we can go and explore and learn from.
So you're asking me to define reincarnation, the principles behind it, the reason behind it, introducing the possibility that it's not a contiguous one lifetime to another lifetime to another lifetime, but a multi-dimensional
Right.
experience that might be on multiple timelines with multiple aspects of the self that are placed into different parallel universes. The answer, do you want to know the answer? The absolute answer? I
Yeah.
don't know. Am I aware of all of that? Yeah. Do I have experiences that may indicate that there is truth in that? Yes. Would I try to make that your experience and your truth? Absolutely not. Your
Mhm.
job is to figure that out for yourself. If I told you, it doesn't become your direct experience.
Right.
It becomes a bit of transferred information by a source that you trust that now becomes part of your belief structure
Right.
that will affect your experience, your
Yeah.
direct experience. I don't want to do that. That would make me a teacher or a facilitator, not a tour guide. I just want to show you there are some who believe, right? And that may be true. And they live in that building right over there. And we're going to stop the bus now, and you can go into that building and ask those questions because there is an aspect of self that wants to know, and there's an aspect of self that actually knows.
Right. Yeah. By the way,
Fine.
thank you for understanding what I was saying. That's a miracle, honestly.
I do that for a living. I told you. And I knew that it was a deep question for you because you said the magic words. If that makes any sense.
Oh,
You're absolutely right. She's always, if that makes any sense. And I go, well, let me think. I'm going to do this carefully.
he's like, no, it doesn't.
No, I didn't do that.
No, but yeah, I'm glad you said that because free will, we're really not brought up to have free will with many things. So that's good that you're expressing that.
I have a problem with determinism, predeterminism.
Mm,
That's
Ooh,
just
so do I.
that's just my belligerent little child that does not want to believe that it's all been laid out for me and that I just have to walk through the same path over and over and over until I get whatever the mystical teaching and
right.
understanding of this path is, right? That said, I've had enough experiences in my life to know that the shit that happened, if you excuse my language, was not of my making.
Mhm.
I know this because there is no way that I could have met with Bob Monroe. I didn't know the man even existed. I was living in New York City. I had just gotten married. By serendipitous or synchronistic events, I ended up in Nelson County, Virginia, when it wasn't even going to be part of that wasn't my plan. I was living in New York City. I
Right.
was a recording engineer. That's where you do recording, not
Yeah.
John Boy Walton country. If
Yep.
you know the Waltons, that's where Nelson County is, right? But I had a strong pull to move to Nelson County or Albemarle County, where Charlottesville is. My then wife had that same pull. We didn't know why we had the pull. We just had the pull and we followed it. Joseph Campbell refers to as it hearing the call, and we didn't refuse. We just said, sure, whatever. I was 22 years old. I could do things like that and
Right.
not worry about making a mistake, right? It wasn't going to be critical.
Mhm.
I loved it. And then one day, out of the blue, a guy named Bob Monroe left a voicemail on my answering machine. How 1980s is that?
Mhm.
And he asked me a question that was so fundamental to recording that I was like, who is this guy? Because he was an old guy. All of my clients were young musicians. That's where Dave Matthews Band came from,
Mm-hmm.
Charlottesville, all those guys, right?
Cool.
And here's this old guy asking me if I could mix to 0 VU, which is recording speak for can you make a recording without distorting it and make sure it's loud enough and
Mhm.
can you do your job? I said, Miss Monroe, I wouldn't be a very good recording engineer if I couldn't. And that
Mhm.
was it. We met, we loved each other. It, I dug this guy, and we spent 7 years not only me being mentored through the process and completely immersed, but in a life changing relationship of love.
Right.
It was
Yeah,
like,
one of the things I like most, and I hate that I never ever got a chance to meet him, but I love the soothing, calming tone of his voice.
mm,
He had a magical voice for what he was doing.
he did. And he taught me everything I know. So when people say, I love your voice on these recordings, and thank you, Bob.
I always wanted to add one thing to your little earlier narrative. My father was a minister,
Hmm.
and of course he believed in God and Jesus Christ. But the most I would see him argue was with, and I don't mean ugly, but I mean argue with
Hmm.
people that believed everything is predetermined
Hmm.
and it's all been laid out and you got no free will or any agency. He
Hmm.
says, don't you realize that just made God the author of all sin?
Hmm.
And the
Yeah,
looks
right.
on their face was amazing. He utterly destroyed their belief system with one sentence.
That's it. I mean, if you go into the Garden of Eden story, it's all metaphorical, of
Yep.
course, in my opinion, anyway.
Mhm.
But you can't have a tree of life and a tree of the knowledge of the of duality, primal duality, good and evil, and a serpent in paradise without expecting that there's going to be some problems.
Mhm. Right.
And Adam and Eve didn't put it there. It's all metaphorical. And
It has to be because if it's the Garden of Eden, your new creation supposed to be enjoying their life. I don't think you'd let the serpent in.
I don't think I
Uh,
would.
exactly. Well, exactly. I want to thank you for coming on. It's been amazing.
Please
And
come
I'm,
on again.
yes, please come on again. let's together pick other topics of your interest, and we'll go over them. But I can tell, we've got nearly 300 viewers now, and there'll be many more as this plays out over the next week or two. And so I'm glad we're doing this, and I want to make sure that we get you again where we're over the preliminaries and we can do an exploration. So please, I'm sorry.
Ask about the conference coming up.
Oh, what conference?
Can you talk
He
about
was
the
talking
conference?
about the Biohackers
Yeah.
Expo.
Oh, tell us about it. Well, I was going to say, tell us what you've got going on and what people should pay attention to and how to get in touch with you.
Well, the website where the work that I present is thetriadmind.com. You can go up there and read all about it. If you want to hear interviews that I've done with some of the most incredible consciousness researchers in the academic space and the spiritual space, I've met some really beautiful souls. I would recommend for now that you go to the Expanding on Consciousness on YouTube channel. You'll find, I think, 36 different interviews that I've done with these brilliant minds. And I'm going to start the Triad Mind podcast very soon because the Monroe Institute, which was the organization that I worked with, and also the sponsor of the Expanding on Consciousness podcast, kind of ran out of funds for that. So I'm just going to pick up the torch. So you will be able to find those two links. You can always get in touch with me through the website. That's mark@triadmind.com. I hold workshops via Zoom online for all level 3 members who are part of stage 1. Stage 2 is coming out. Stage 3 is in production. The Biohackers Expo, I was asked to speak at by Sandy Martin, the founder and the creator of the expo, where people who are, involved in technological biohacking techniques are, selling their wares. I'm not selling anything in particular. I'm trying to help people to understand that the ultimate biohack is consciousness. So maybe I can make a case for that. I will be presenting there on 3 different segments, one of which we'll also discuss and try to demystify and try to break down what was said and talked about the constructs in that CIA document. So,
Good.
although I was not a member of the remote viewing team, nor was I ever a member of the CIA or the Illuminati. So, anybody watching this, please don't send me emails asking me about my affiliation with DIA or CIA. That ain't me. However, I did work with a lot of those people, and I worked with Bob Monroe, and Bob Monroe took that document and what was revealed in that document very seriously. He just wasn't interested in the negative political applications of these things. He realized, as I realized, that once you realize who you are and who everybody else is, there won't be any actualization agency or authority that will be used for malintent.
Yep.
We can
Yeah, they don't want
create the
that.
world. We can get back to the garden if we want to.
Well, well, to me, ascending and raising your frequency and all of this stuff means learning how to interact and read each other in a way that allows us to feel how our actions impact all the people around us. And that will, as you entangle with a bunch of people and that grows, it will sweep the world. You won't get everybody, but if you get the majority, this is a transformed planet.
And it takes place in very short order.
It'll be, people don't understand how, because the benefits are so great, how it will grow exponentially once it's demonstrated it's real. And the thing that bothers me before we say goodbye, it bothers me that we're not talking about something new. We're talking about stuff that's been practiced all over the world for hundreds of years, thousands in some cases.
Yes.
And Indian gurus were levitating for hundreds of years. And on and on. We can just go on and on. It's been great. I'm glad you've come on. We'll work out when you can come back. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm really happy you got to see this, and I've been really looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank
Well,
you very
thank
much.
you very much, Lala and Bob, and peace to all of you who are out there watching. I hope you got curious. Take care.